And welcome back to my blog. Essays on the Constitution of the United States, Part 42. I think I got my Roman numerals correct now. Reply to a Landholder 2. The New York Journal, number 2282, Wednesday, April 30, 1788. From the American Herald, printed at Boston. Mr. Greenleaf. As the Connecticut Landholders' publications are dispersed throughout the state, it will be useful for the sake of truth to publish the following. To the public. An elegant writer, under the signature of a landholder, having in a series of publications with a modesty and delicacy peculiar to himself, undertaken to instruct members of legislatures, executives, and conventions in their duty respecting the new Constitution, is, in stating facts, unfortunate in being repeatedly detected in errors. But his perseverance therein does honor, quote, to his magnanimity, end quote, and reminds me of Dr. Sangarado in Gil Blas, who, being advised to alter his practice as it was founded on false principles and destructive to his patients, firmly determined to pursue it because he had written a book in support of it. Had our learned author, the modern Sangarado, confined himself to facts and to reasoning on the Constitution, he might have continued to write without interruption from its opposers, until, by instructing others, he had obtained that instruction which he seems to need, or a temporary relief from the unenviable malady, the cacoethes scribendi. Whatever the heck that is. I might have to look it up. But his frequent misrepresentations having exposed him to suspicions that as a disciple of Mandeville he was an advocate for vice, or that to correct his curiosity some humorist has palmed on him a spurious history of the proceedings of the Federal Convention and exhibited his credulity as a subject of ridicule, it is proper to set him right in facts, which, in almost every instance, he has misstated. In a late address to the Honorable Luther Martin, Esquire, the landholder has asserted that Mr. Gary uniformly opposed Mr. Martin's principles. But this is a circumstance wholly unknown to Mr. Gary, until he was informed of it by the Connecticut landholder. Indeed, Mr. Gary, from the first acquaintance with Mr. Martin, has, quote, uniformly had a friendship for him, end quote. This writer also asserted, quote, that the day Mr. Martin took his seat in convention without requesting information or to be let into the reasons of the adoptions of what he might not approve, he opened against them in a speech which held during 2 days, end quote. But the facts are that Mr. Martin had been a considerable time in the convention before he spoke, that when he entered into the debates, he appeared not to need information, as he was fully possessed of the subject, and that his speech, if published, would do him great honor. Another assertion of this famous writer is that Mr. Gary, in a sarcastical reply, admired the strength of Mr. Martin's lungs and his profound knowledge in the first principles of government. That this reply left him a prey to the most humiliating reflections, but these did not teach him to bound his future speeches by the lines of moderation, for the very next day he exhibited without a blush another specimen of eternal volubility. This is so remote from the truth that no such reply was made by Gary to Mr. Martin, or to any member of the convention. On the contrary, Mr. Martin, on the first day he spoke, about the time of adjournment, signified to the convention that the heat of the season and his indisposition prevented his proceeding, and the House adjourned without further debate or a reply to Mr. Martin from any member whatever. Again, the landholder had asserted that Mr. Martin voted an appeal should lay to the Supreme Judiciary of the United States for the correction of all errors both in law and fact, and agreed to the clause that declares 9 states to be sufficient to put the government in motion, and in a note says, Mr. Gary agreed with Mr. Martin on these questions. Whether there is any truth in the assertions as they relate to Mr. Martin, he can best determine. But as they respect Mr. Gary, they reverse the facts, for he not only voted against the first proposition, which is not stated by the landholder with the accuracy requisite for a writer on government, but contended for jury trials in civil cases, and declared his opinion that a federal judiciary with the powers above mentioned would be as oppressive and dangerous as the establishment of a star chamber. And as to the clause that declares 9 states to be sufficient to put the government in motion, Mr. Gary was so much opposed to it as to vote against it in the first instance, and afterwards to move for a reconsideration of it. The landholder, having in a former publication asserted that Mr. Gary introduced a motion respecting the redemption of old continental money, and the public having been informed by a paragraph in the Massachusetts Sentinel, number 32 of volume 8, as well as by the Honorable Mr. Martin, that neither Mr. Gary or any other member had introduced such a proposition, the landholder now says that out of 126 days, Mr. Martin attended only 66. And then inquires whether it is to be presumed that Mr. Martin could have been minutely informed of all that happened in convention and committees of convention during the 60 days of absence. And why is it that we do not see Mr. McHenry's verification of his assertion, who was of the committee for considering a provision for the debts of the Union? But if these inquiries were intended for subterfuges, unfortunately for the landholder, they will not avail him. For, had Mr. Martin not been present at the debates on this subject, the fact is that Mr. Gary was not on a committee with Mr. McHenry, or with any other person, for considering a provision for the debts of the Union, or any provision that related to the subject of old continental money. Neither did he make any proposition in convention, committee, or on any occasion to any member of convention or other person respecting the redemption of such money, and the assertions of the landholder to the contrary are altogether destitute of the shadows of truth. And there we end part 1 of Reply to a Landholder 2. Interesting to note this bit about the 9 states, because if you will look up the Articles of Confederation, you will see, and I believe it's Article 13, requires a full, all 13 states to approve any major changes to the Articles of Confederation. And don't you think that an entire new government under a constitution, as opposed to the Articles, would have been a pretty significant change in the Articles of Confederation? So I think unanimous consent was required and not just 9 states. Thus, in 1787, we had a coup. More tomorrow. Make it a great day, and bye for now.